Really happy to have the five of us here together to discuss all of the aspects of what it means to flourish and be our best selves in a metaverse that ideally is a friendly, human-driven space and not just automatic and mechanical. So this is a true pleasure to be here with everybody today. And I was thinking we could go around and introduce ourselves and our backgrounds and a little bit of what brings us to the table. So if we want to just give a few words about who you are, where you come from, and what your driving force is behind what you do. And introducing Mikhaila, if you want to start out.
Hi, everyone. Mikhaila Stettler. So these days, I'm a multidisciplinary immersive artist and writer and producer, and my work is really focused on creating immersive art and entertainment experiences that activate human potential and stimulate spiritual connection. And my background prior to this was a couple of decades in holistic health and wellness, which included a lot of teaching lifestyle medicine and teaching meditation and energy healing for several decades as well. So all of that informs my creative work. It's all kind of my spiritual practice and creative practice are fused and integrated together. So that's what I'm here about. Nanea, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Nanea Reeves, and I am CEO and co-founder of Trip. And Trip is, right now, I believe we're the #1 VR meditation application, at least with the largest audience, available on Oculus Quest and PlayStation VR, as well as the Vive Flow, which is a new device in market. And we just launched our first AR catalog experiences on the Nreal glasses, and we're working on an expansion into mobile in a big way, so stay tuned for some really cool content on our mobile app in a couple weeks. And then later this year we'll launch an augmented reality experience over Niantic's Lightship platform, which will enable metaverse interactions with the physical world, which we're very excited about. And on the clinical side, we have also acquired a company called PsyAssist, and we're keeping that as our medical and clinical brand. And we've just kicked off a pilot study for use in some clinical settings for pre-session anxiety reduction. And so we're very excited about that, starting to go to market in the middle of this year. And then what I'm most excited about was this week we just announced the integration of the Evolver community and Jeremy joining the Trip team. So now we have live events and programming, which I'll let Jeremy talk about. But we're so excited to expand beyond connecting to self in a way that allows you to connect with others. And then later this year through Niantic, you'll be able to connect with the world differently.
So Jeremy, why don't you take off on that intro?
That's my segue. Absolutely. Thank you, Nanea. And yeah, so about 5 years ago when I discovered virtual reality, I just immediately saw that it was a potential space for spiritual community in a way that I had been thirsting for and that wasn't possible in the real world. I started leading meditation events and they took off. They were kind of sneaky, right? Like people didn't show up in VR thinking, I'm going to go meditate. But they found us when they were looking for their games or other experiences and really got a lot out of it. I think most people know they should be meditating and they don't know how to find the space to do it. And we've really grown over the last couple of years, especially through the pandemic. And as Nanea said, we recently joined forces with the Trip team and became kind of their live Sangha. We're still kind of working on how to define and name that, but really excited about the possibilities working together and kind of expanding into the metaverse so we can have little safe sanctuaries of Trip community all over the place. Thank you.
So Skip, I think let's segue to you then.
Okay, I'm Skip Rizzo, and I direct the Medical Virtual Reality Lab at the University of Southern California Institute for Creative Technologies. And over the years, I've designed, developed, and evaluated a fair range of VR systems applied for clinical populations. Probably most visible of our work is our PTSD work, but that's just one real sliver of a wider portfolio of applications addressing populations like autism, Alzheimer's, post-stroke rehabilitation, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, wide range of clinical conditions. And, what drove that career basically is my previous work in brain injury rehab as a clinical psychologist, where got very frustrated with the limitations of the tools we had to help people recover their function, and saw virtual reality as an avenue for creating these simulated experiential worlds that we could design systems to test, train, teach, and treat human function.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least,
Well,
Caitlin.
I set up with the experience design. I'm an experience designer that focuses on fostering mindful metaverse fluency. So I look a lot at the fluency of what this means as a language, to be creating, to be having mindfulness experiences, and even to go beyond to creative ideation. I focus on intersections between technology and well-being, and I teach digital well-being at Stanford. So about 6 years ago, I founded a company called MindWise, and that was after 2 decades of working in education, working also in business applications, and just seeing that our minds don't learn in boxes. Like, we actually don't think in categories that are all separated. So I believe a lot in intersectional design, looking at things like neurobiology, using all the best science at our fingertips, and then talking right now about what it means to be human and to use humanity in a new way when so many tasks are automated. What does it actually mean to have tapping into our creative voice, our potentials, and then looking at new metrics for success and well-being that go cross-industry worldwide. So yeah, I'm very aspirational. And I will say that right now, I've published 2 books, Mindful by Design and Designing Wonder. And so part of being a writer and an author is seeing how those ideas actually have fleshed out use cases in the world. So I agree with all of you. I think that it's animated when experiences are shared with others and you see other people benefiting from them. And that's the power of the metaverse. So right now, I think it's an exciting time. This is sort of why together I'm sharing right now. Our topic is really flourishing in the friendly metaverse, not thinking about, there are a lot of buzzwords when you use the word metaverse. People can quickly think right now about maybe some of the things that come up that don't have to do with wellness, don't have to do with connection. So today we're really coming together to deepen the dialogue. So, this is the roundtable. We are gathered as if we're around a virtual fire. Maybe in the future we'll have a camp creative session that's in XR, as Nanea suggested. I think that would be great. Today, just bringing you here together is part of this mind share, really taking your rich backgrounds and floating some questions. Like the first one, what does it actually mean to flourish in the metaverse? Like, could we just quickly give little use cases that come from our lives about what it means to flourish in the metaverse? So, I'll start really quickly just saying that to me, flourishing in the metaverse is not leaving our physical body behind, but really seeing what we can do in the metaverse that we can't do in a physical metaverse. I designed an experience in December that had to do with the solstice and wintertime and the landscape, and had people experiencing the aurora borealis. And that was one use case where some people couldn't travel, they had limited mobility, and they were able to really feel like they had a connection with a natural wonder by traveling there and having a shared experience that was about celebrating that element of nature, and then having a live meditation together. So that was one example where, I designed that and had it be very intentional about what it meant to flourish. So I'll kind of pass it along if anyone else has an example to bring up of flourishing in the metaverse.
Well, I'll just jump in and say, when I see this question, I think, well, what is it in real life? What helps people to flourish in real life? And then I try to make the translation to the simulated worlds that we have. And I think you bring up a key one to create, we have the capability to create experiences for people that they might not ever have in real life. And in real life, what helps you to flourish that way? It's really new experiences, ways of learning that are different than what you might have expected, and the social connection of sharing those experiences with people. And I think this is going back to what you said, the metaverse supports those experiences the same as they would in real life, but with kind of on steroids. You can create some of the kinds of worlds like what Nanea has created, but bring you to a place that no one has ever seen before. Or you can go to nature, or you can have communications with people that you might not ever in an embodied way have that opportunity. So I think that these are ultimate pluses that transfer from real life, or whatever life that is, to meta life.
Yeah, and I think that the opportunity that we have as business leaders and creators and contributors to this space is to really help the industry think beyond the take your digital twin to the virtual mall and buy some digital Nikes, right? Because right now the narrative around the metaverse is all about how do brands enter the metaverse, and just the idea that already people are approaching it with the concept of limited land in an inherently infinite space is part of the problem. So I would say the call to action to anybody who's like-minded, and not from a condescending standpoint, but maybe we are keepers of the, let's build, if we had a mulligan on building a different version of our world, this is our opportunity. So to bring all the crappy things that we've built in the physical world into the metaverse, I would say at least the five of us have to be the ones who say, yeah, no, right? And so that's kind of what I get excited about. And so when we built Trip, it was really with that approach, because of course, whenever people hear meditation in VR, they automatically think, oh, I'll be on a beach and a Celtic voice will tell me to relax and inhale, and oftentimes you'll even hear in some of these apps being told to close your eyes, which are not dealing with the native inherent attributes of virtual reality, which is that you can play with scale, you can make people feel like they're floating when they're sitting in their physical living room at the same time in their favorite chair. I mean, those are the kind of things that we went, well, let's kind of give people experiences they can't have. And I think that when I look at what Evolvers created and the opportunity with community, there's also community experiences that we can innovate that you cannot have anywhere, that maybe play with the layer of abstraction that, Skip has a remarkable study where he shared how people dealing with a virtual therapist or an agent, they could actually be more open about maybe some of the things they were ashamed of and get that physical relief. So those are the kind of things I'm interested in, rather than a digital twin. Like, what is the version of my identity that might be multifaceted and a whole new, or part of a collective consciousness? Like, these are the things we can facilitate. We need to really make sure we build that.
Yes. And I'm loving that you're touching in a way on all of the topics. We're going to go more deeply into some of these about identity and about storytelling and about shared social spaces. So yeah, flourishing might not have just one definition. It's multifaceted.
I would agree too. Like, I really appreciated what you were just speaking about, Nanea, because this is exactly my thinking, is like, what can we do in a metaverse environment that we can't do in a physical real life environment? Or what can we do better? And I think it's really important that we continuously keep those questions in mind, because like some people, like this group here, has more of like a natural imagination to think in those ways. So we really have to keep that in the forefront, because like for me, one of the main things that drives me is like, oh my God, I can do something that I could never have done before. So let's say like I was born with all these unique kind of spiritual psychic gifts. And when I've been like I've had certain experiences, and I've always like, what if I could just bring, 100,000 people into that experience with me, and they could have something that would maybe typically take them years and years and years of like meditation or spiritual practice. But what if I could create it for them and they could just be brought into it right away? So to me, this like whole thing of flourishing, it's a combination of things of like, Jeremy, what you're doing, and Caitlin, what you're doing is really like the social connections. There's certain kinds of opportunities to connect that I wouldn't even come across these people if it wasn't in a metaverse environment. And the experience of, I mean, yes, we could do something like that in real life, but there's this extra added that we can do in a virtual world that we can't get. Like, it's just like, to me, that just blows my mind. And it's endlessly.
You'll see us also look at like the experience you were just describing is how do we invite the community to help us create it together? Give them the toolkits. They can actually help us build the meditative experience. And we can use AI and machine learning to actually create procedural experiences that can go into some kind of communal coherence. That's really cool. So yeah, it's really there's a huge opportunity to allow the community to build it out build the world out itself, right? Like a digital consciousness.
And in the play of this game, as we kind of bridge into the next, I'm kind of teeing this up maybe for Jeremy to to kind of bridge both flourishing and how we relate to our consciousness, because I know we all are advocates for relating to that interior landscape of the mind and our psyche differently, and how do we see it relating a little differently in XR spaces? I'm just so curious. What do you think, Jeremy, kind of kicking it off here?
Yeah, I'm going to just start backwards and move to this. So I think what we do a lot with Evolver is something that we could do in real life, but we don't. It's not so much a you can't do in real life, but it used to be for thousands of years that humans had places in real life that gathered them really naturally, connected them to local wisdoms and truths and mentors. That's completely broken down over the last 2 generations, 3 generations. And so what we really give people space to do is connect. Nanea was talking about the power of community. I think that's the magic that we're really playing with is people are lonely. Like I'm talking about pre-pandemic, people were lonely. People were working and going home and boop, 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 staring at those little screens and then going to sleep. And then, the pandemic, I think, made that even more clear and even more a truth for people. But it already was. And so it's kind of ironic, maybe a tough sell for some people who've never done it, that to put on these goggles that takes you out of the world is somehow going to connect you more deeply to yourself, to the world, to other people, but it really can. And that's what we've really uncovered with our events. And that's what makes people flourish. People need downtime and alone time and all that, but people need connection. People need to know that people wonder where they are and ask about how stuff is going in their life and remember them. And, when Gautama taught people how to meditate, which I think is an extremely important mental health exercise, he told them to do it with other people. We think in the West of meditation as a very, solo experience, and it's can be. It certainly can be. It certainly is in some ways. But if you don't have people you're talking to about your meditations, who you can learn from, who you can share with, your stumbles and your frustrations, you're not really doing it fully. So I think community in VR is a huge aspect of how people can flourish. In terms of, how we can kind of access different parts of our identity and really, step into that, it's amazing what happens when people are in our events, and not just our events, when they're in VR and they have an avatar and they see that avatar in front of them. And just like we believe that this is our body, which I don't know, that's an illusion too at some level, people are willing to believe that the avatar in social VR is their body as well, and that the avatars around them are real people. But they're not real people that they're going to see at work. They're not real people that they're going to see at school or at the supermarket. So there's like both a closeness and an intimacy and a separation and an anonymity. And that is heady stuff. It allows for vulnerability. It allows for you to step into behaviors that you are yearning to in real life and practice and try them on. So I think there's just a ton of potential there.
I'd like to piggyback on that if possible, just by saying the science backs up exactly what you're saying, Jeremy. We've done research in a variety of contexts and find that people feel less worry about impression management, self-disclose more personal information, are more willing to endorse psychological symptoms when brought up in a conversation with a virtual agent that's an agent, not driven by another person. I think this is, you get all the good parts about interacting with a person, but not so much of the risk. So I think
too, I think you said, right?
Mm-hmm,
and Philip
mm-hmm.
Rosedale, the creator of Second Life, and really, if you want to understand a very mature metaverse environment or online world, they certainly were one of the first to introduce their own currency and land sales, etc. But he was telling me one of his most active communities are autistic people who go into Second Life to have intimate social connections that they are not comfortable having in the physical world, and that it's a vehicle for a deeper connection for them. And I found that fascinating when he told me that.
I want to, Skip, I actually wonder if you can respond to this, because we kind of got a little bit, which is fine. We're getting a little freewheeling here, but the last slide was really about how we relate to our own consciousness differently in VR. And one of the things I'm thinking about is that perceptually, as soon as our eyes are open, our perception is focused to have an experience of an objective outside ourselves reality. And yet, if we were doing something like a meditation or having a mystical or transcendent experience, you're using kind of inner sight. So now we're having them both going front side, back side, going at the same time. And I wonder if you might have something you'd like to share about the perceptual aspects of this and how that difference between the subjective and objective experience of reality, given how we sense visually.
Well, there are open eye meditations. I mean, the Tibetans have been doing it for a long time. Every statue of the Buddha, his eyes aren't closed; they're open, right, with the bodhi drishti gaze. So my practice is an open eye meditation. It's a Dzogchen practice, and it's about awareness.
It's true. There are open eye, but it is, to me, what I'm wondering is if we are actually on a threshold of an expansion of consciousness and use of perceptual faculties. So I don't know, Skip, do you have something you want to share about that?
Well, I think that one of the things we've learned over the years in how people interact in these types of simulated environments is that we can, in fact, fool the brain. That your frontal lobes may tell you that this is just a simulation, but when you're standing on the edge of a plank looking down 40 stories, your limbic system, reacts to the perceptual or sensory array of the content, and you get that fear, or that chill. And that's a good and a bad thing. We can leverage that for clinical purposes. We can evoke emotions. We find that, in fact, with people with PTSD that also have comorbid depression that have a hard time activating their emotions, we can do it in VR better than an eyes closed, pull up the imagery type approach. Now, that's not saying this is a panacea or a magic bullet for every ill, but there is a certain power that if leveraged, based on good theory, intuition, and some science, of course, along the way, and we can start to leverage that for good. So, whether your eyes are closed or open in meditation, I think just the fact that you start off in a context that you feel safe in, or maybe you feel safe and you see other people, thousands of people on the landscape having a shared experience. If you close your eyes for part of it and then open your eyes and see everybody there,
Still
so
consciousness.
yeah,
All in the container of consciousness. So
yeah, so you're creating context for experience, and the good, the bad, and the ugly can come from that. And hopefully, like Nanea said in the very beginning, hopefully we're going to be the folks that try to say, hey, let's use it for good. Let's not just sell products.
No, I do think there's also the toxicity of online gaming communities. I've actually run I've run them before, and coming from the games industry, it's also a vehicle of releasing stuff in ways, right? I was a hardcore gamer for a long time and dealing with a lot of that stuff. Sometimes it was overwhelming as a female, and other times it just it was fun to kind of get in there. And I think we can allow those spaces to exist, but create safe sort of zones that can be more healing and supportive in nature. And there's a need for both of them. There's interesting condition called aphantasia, where people can't visualize in their mind's eye, and they struggle with audio apps for meditation. We've heard that from a lot of our users who have this condition. Somehow our experiences in VR really filled a void for them. So I think we're still learning as we go, but this idea of consciousness, I think we have a really cool idea to create a collective consciousness that is represented audio, visually. You're going to see Trip experiment with that. And how do you get a sense of feeling like you're contributing, like you're giving and receiving to something that is global? And that's a big principle for how we're approaching the design for our Niantic AR product, is to represent the ripple effect of your self-care in the context of everyone else, so that you get this feeling of sending and receiving, or giving and receiving to some collective fabric. These are kind of things you can experiment with when you meditate for a long time. There is a different energy, like when I've done 10 hours a day in Tibet for 3 months nonstop, and you're with a community of 1,000 other people doing it at that same level. Something does happen to you, and how you shift your perception of who you are in the context of the group.
Yeah. And I think, for me, that speaks to both consciousness and the design principles, because I do think, that, as Skip was saying, the science shows more open-mindedness and also a different relationship with, say, the self-beliefs we've carried, the stories that we thought, the labels, and some people say that's why I call it Wonderface. When people put on, say, a device, usually their mouth goes wide open in this wow state. And a lot of my research right now is even talking with people at Greater Good Science Center, Dr. Keltner, like, what does it mean to really track wonder and awe and that feeling? And I think our consciousness in VR, it can be a very special and vulnerable stage. So if we can make it as safe as possible to also have that paradox of risk taking, that's what I see myself called to do, to remind people that they're on a hero's journey, the experience actually starts before they put on a headset or use a device. It's about integrating technology in a really mindful way, and it kind of mentoring, along that hero journey. Everybody needs mentors, and they also need insights with questions that they might not even know to ask. And so I think, from my perspective, that consciousness can be very soulful and very intimate, and also social and shared, because you start to realize, like Nanea was saying, Jeremy, Skip, Mikhaila, you're not alone. And yet, here you are having a new relationship with your own mind, your history, your values. So yeah.
You know what I'm excited about too in this idea of contribution? The metaverse becomes a real sort of universal fabric of how to facilitate new earning opportunities that are more contribution focused. Like, what is value? What is reward, right? If I share something that's supportive, that has value. We have opportunities to create different kinds of economic models that are really interesting, and Web3 components added into the metaverse. I think what is a person's value and what is a person's contribution, and how could they be rewarded for that in a way that is flourishing, creates flourishing. So there's some interesting experiences that I've seen out there, and some things we've been thinking of that are really, I think this is going to be a huge area of innovation.
I'm smiling because this is a new level of meaning making. This could be part of our retreat. I'm reading again, Man's Search for Meaning.
Oh, what a great book.
Human Search for Meaning. And I do think this, why not introduce economics? It's sort of, we're talking now next about creative flow states and about what it means to access a state of flow. I think that, some of my research that I bring to the table is going back to Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and his areas. He was a researcher that brought up flow states as that state of your abilities meeting with challenge.
Sorry, it's my chief security officer.
In a state of flow, yes. Actually, this is interesting. Csikszentmihalyi really loved dogs as well. So, you have this affinity to animals and research into all kinds of creatures and their creative flow states. But I did want to investigate that, because I think in what I've found in VR and XR is that you do have a better ability to have focus on a task. Certainly one of the descriptions is losing a sense of time. I can be in VR for a long time and lose track, just kind of lose both my inhibition and some of those attachments that we have, whether it's an attachment to identity. So again, looking at the challenge skills balance. And for me, part of the mission with well-being is I designed a place and space called Flow Camp that really gets people into this state of play using some of those lifelong kindergarten project passion, peers, and play. How can you get people in an invitational way able to see, oh, there's all kinds of possibilities here. Surprise and delight can exist in worlds of wonder. And there's also challenges that are safe, that let people focus on leadership skills in a new way. So for me, that's where flow gets integrated and becomes a creative practice that's formative and not summative. And I'm really curious around the table what you think about creative flow and how it comes up.
Yeah, I mean, it's why video games are so popular, right? Because you get the skill challenge ratio. Sometimes they call it game balancing. If it's not right, it's not fun. And you have that reward feedback loop and the embodiment that is also part of the flow triggering. I'm interested in experimenting with, if you had 6 virtual arms, what kind of music could you create with digital instruments, right? We can do that kind of stuff. That's why we have to think outside of an avatar that has 2 arms. What if I'm doing a virtual concert and I can have one hand doing this, playing that, and I can spawn off another hand? Have you seen some of this AI voice? transferring is so interesting. Like I could have two mics and have an AI that has scanned Skip's voice, and I can sing with one mic using Skip's voice but my own, intention, and then go to my voice. Like this is stuff that's happening right now at live events using AI. Imagine avatars that are multifaceted, that have multiple limbs and capabilities, that can shard off. Like you look at the biblical word, I think it's a Hebrew word, Elohim, for God before Adonai that was used, and it was plural. Like, what is that plurality, right? It's a plural identity model for deity. Like, I don't know. It's just kind of interesting to think about these things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the adult mind is really boring because it has to be for the most part to survive in the world that we leave as kids. We get really used to patterns and doing the same stuff in the same way. And I'm not saying that as a good thing. It's just how we adapt to adulthood. And so much of, I think, what spiritual technology tries to do is shake us out of that. A lot of spiritual leaders have talked about making adults feel like kids again. And there's just something about VR, just all by itself, before we do anything else to it, that the adult mind, stops doing that. I've done thousands of demos over the last 5-6 years, and at a good percentage of them, someone will say, "Hey, did you bring a joint?" And I'm like, listen, you don't need any drugs in VR. It is a mind-altering substance by itself. And it really is. It really is. It really transports you out of the way you look around and see the world and think about things and structure them. Suddenly you find yourself, like standing on the top of a mountain, talking to someone from France and, exchanging recipes, and it's just, you're out of your normal brain. And so that flow state is so blocked normally by our adult ego trying to make sure it's doing the right thing and getting us through our day and accomplishing our tasks, which is good. It's got to happen. But, there's just something really powerful about having this technology that just flips everything immediately to a new state. And
in creative flow, whatever it is, it's always going to promote a state of well-being and a kind of automatic spiritual connection with your own inner source energy, which is unlimited. So to me, I'm really interested in that triggering and stimulating and activating people's creative energy in an immersive experience.
Yeah, but that's and that's totally valid. It's just slightly different from what Caitlin was talking about, which is creating flow states, which have a very specific mechanism and an impact on human performance that's been measured, and Beat Saber is really like the ultimate. It hits all the things: the skill challenge ratio, the reward feedback loop, the adaptive skill challenge ratio that gets harder just as you get better, and it produces the embodiment state, and you get all the triggers that happen, which is loss of self, different sense and relationship to time, and your accuracy and your focus become more precise, right? So they've tested those mechanisms on snipers. They've tested it on, people who need to do surgery and, precision kind of work. And when they get into a flow state before those activities, they actually, they can measure the difference. And Mikhaila, has done a lot of research. Who are the guys in Austin have as well.
Absolutely.
This has always been one of the compelling justifications for driving rehabilitation, particularly with physical and occupational therapy following a stroke or TBI. If you've ever had to do any of that kind of work, that it is boring, repetitive, and frustrating, which everybody leaves off. I mean, when you've had a stroke and you remember how you were 2 months ago doing everything you used to do, and now you have these challenges, it's very hard to get people to do rehab. So, it's always been a page out of the game development book to keep people in the flow channel, to get them to do their rehab in a game context that's cheerful or bright or interesting to them as a user, and not make it too hard, but not make it too easy, but make it enough that it can be titrated to their level of participation or the capability, so that you can get them going, even if their movement is just that in the beginning. You turn that into part of the interface of an activity, and you get people, going that way. And so there's tremendous overlap between, these, game development ideas and motivation and psychology and clinical care rehabilitation. Same thing with, mindfulness. I mean, most of the people that need to do mindfulness or meditation or any of these activities, they're usually the ones that, to get them to sit still for a minute and focus, you're shoveling against the tide. So you got to have something to get them engaged, to put them in a world that, all of a sudden it fills them with that face you were describing, that awful look, look, not awful.
What you call it, the Wonderface or something?
Yeah, I called it Wonderface, and it's like a combination of, I find intrinsic benefits plus extrinsic, like you actually feel seen, you actually feel known. And, it kind of brings us in a way to this concept of how experiences can be solo and really valuable, and also can be shared and very valuable, because in some of my experiences, you have those benefits coming when you're in a solo experience. In others, you have that positive reinforcement happening. As Jeremy alluded to at the beginning, we've had shared sessions together that are social, and people say, oh, this is really different. And there is that friendly factor that motivates someone in a positive way. I think this is one of the sinister aspects of maybe tech and metaverse that we all know through gamification, that there are different ways to really spike dopamine and to have people coming back for more. And yet, we want to have group wellness experiences or solo ones that are really meaningful and friendly. And speaking about some of the research Skip has talked about, making it fun and uplifting, and certainly a repeat experience, but really, really positive, and longevity, meeting those flourishing needs. So this is a pretty deep question, and I think we can go there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the hardest part about getting people to meditate is getting people to meditate. And so, it's really nice to see people who you like and who remember you, like all those things I was saying before, that ask about you and wonder how you are when you're not there. And so that actually is why most people show up to our meditations, if we're being honest. They know they need it for their wellness, but they show up because they're going to see some friends and get some of those dopamine hits. And then, hey, it's like, now I'm here, and it's really easy to do the meditation because I'm already here with my friends. And so then there's that part of it that's just undeniable. I've been meditating by myself and with other people for more than half my life, and they are really different experiences. There's no question about it. I remember the first time, it was actually with Quakers. I was running with the Quakers for a little while, because talk about safe people. They're just wonderful. And I was at a youth retreat for a weekend, and I had never gotten silent with a group of people before. I had meditated like body scans and some little breath stuff, but we really spent 20 minutes or more in silence, packed into this little meeting house, and I could feel energy crackling from my body into theirs. I wanted to cry, it was just so powerful to feel so connected to other people. And so one of my questions was, does that follow us into VR? And I wanted to say this earlier too, when we were talking about, I think some of the, implications of consciousness and stuff. I went to seminary for 4 years. I'm an ordained Unitarian Universalist minister. I love chewing on theological questions. And there's certain truths that VR lays bare. Like I talked earlier, that we are really willing to accept the illusion of our avatar as being ourself. And I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to think about with our real life body implications from that. Likewise, when I am with people in VR meditating with them, I feel a crackling of energy. And I really am less believing in the truth of location than I was before, like that I'm here in Boulder, Colorado right now, and you're there in Los Angeles, Skip, and Caitlin in California, or wherever you all are. God, you're all in California, warmer than me. Thanks a lot. But I still feel that energy because it's not really that we're separated. And when we meditate together in VR, we get over that illusion and we are able to feel the truth of our connection and the illusion of our separation. So yeah, it's really powerful for people like I did as a kid to experience that as an adult or at any age in our sessions. So that's some piece of it.
Yeah, and I'm excited to evolve with you sort of the impact in real time, because we can do cool stuff, at least within our own app, where there could be a group coherence that gets visualized by changing the skybox or showing that crackle of the energy. Like that's what we can experience in the metaverse that maybe not, and using the haptics in the controller in a way that I remember once I was in a group Qigong meditation after doing Qigong for a long time, and the facilitator could actually make you feel the Qi moving through each other and handing it off to them. It was the weirdest experience, but we could do that with haptics and stuff. It's kind of interesting. One thing I'll say, Caitlin, on the gamification thing, we've done some research into this, and I call a lot of what I see in the mental health and wellness space as lamification, because it's all about like, get this resiliency score, this mindfulness score, you've achieved enlightenment, etc., which we've even done with our own badging. But it can actually reinforce that you're not okay in the present moment because you haven't hit some optimal state, and it can actually make you feel worse. And so really what we have seen in the games industry, the most long evergreen communities, they have these modes of what we call co-op modes. That's what I was saying to Mikhaila about, like creating experiences together, building environments together. You see what people do in Minecraft together or Roblox together. Those are the communities that really build and bond. And even like what I was experiencing with his community, many of them have contributed to how the spaces get built even in alt space, and so they have a sense of contribution, and that's where I'm excited about gamification and how it gives you a sense of purpose and a feeling of being a part of a bigger whole, which we've seen variations of that very effective in online game communities when they have those modes. But if we abstract it in ways that are kind of more wellness focused, I think it's a huge opportunity.
Yeah. As a community organizer, I do set up a lot of norms and have a background with Howard Rheingold that actually goes back to the days of the well, the before the modern internet as we know it. What is cooperation literacy? What does it mean to build that in? And this discussion actually has me thinking about the mutuality of relational trust. Like, what does it actually mean to have a social trust and have those engagements meet that level of expectation where someone feels seen? And there's an African word, sawubona, that's really close to my heart that means I see you. And the seeing actually brings up a mutuality of freedom, like basically that freedom is not just my freedom over somebody else. It's, oh, how do I have to be for you to feel free and you to feel safe? So it turns something that sometimes is a dialogue about negativity and restriction and all of the rules of what you shouldn't do into this more proactive engagement of, oh, how am I actually cultivating relational trust that acknowledges that people are embodiments in an XR space. So I feel so passionate about this, and that there's a lot of legacy that we can bring intentionally into this metaverse design in this space and place right now. And this group is so inspiring for talking about it, articulating it, and saying, yeah, it's not prescriptive, it's not easy, but it's invitational. And yeah, this is what motivates me.
You know, I think one of the things that's facing the world is our biggest problem right now is we've got a lot of different stories and we can't agree on one. And we're trying to really bring people into stories together and have them process that. And one of the ways that we think of a world in VR is as a stage. All the world's a stage, I hear. And our worlds really are. And so we try to tell a story with our worlds in events. And Caitlin has been to some of these, Nanea has seen some, and we'll actually see some in about an hour. But we really try to look at the world as something that we're going to move a group of people through an experience in together, and it's a story experience. So just as one example, we have an overview effect meditation where you start on the surface of planet Earth and the whole group slowly floats up to outer space to about the height of the International Space Station together while they're experiencing an overview effect meditation that leads to a meta meditation as they float around planet Earth, raining love together down upon the earth. Now, that's the story we all really need right now, right? That we're actually all in this together, that, you know, our destinies are mutually bound, and, you know, that boundaries between countries are made up, and that people in Iran don't hate people in America. Our governments are just crazy. And so we can take people without me having to lecture about, you should think about people from other countries as your friends. We don't say that to them. We let them experience it for themselves so that they have a shared story with everyone who was there together, but it's their own too. They lived it. And that can rewire. I mean, the overview effect is rewired every astronaut and cosmonaut who's gone up to space to see it themselves. And so we say, how can we use VR worlds to help rewire our brains to have these common stories together?
Yeah, and I think in terms
Our friend Kira Benzing, that Caitlin and I both know, she's done remarkable storytelling with live event approach within VR. I think she's really pioneered something amazing that we can look at, you know, even under the umbrella of wellness could be a whole new form of storytelling.
yeah,
Like healing group live event narratives that get generated, you know?
on the theatrical experience, I think one of these things that VR can do really well that you can't do in the physical is make the actual reflective process visible. Like Jeremy and the Evolver group have been part of an experience I designed with, and Mikhaila, you've joined with live sketching and access to the sketch tools, and then it becomes collaborative. So again, what's happening to externalize some of these waves of wonder in the brain. Some of the research led to overview effect being one of the areas of wonder and awe that I've isolated, and then that theatrical experience lets people know, oh yes, you can play a certain narrative role in the journey. There are portals, there are ways to get really curious and then let yourself be riding, kind of surfing the wave of your own thoughts, and have a reflective process that's documented in a spatialized world where you can come back and revisit it and have this relationship with narrative art that's generated. And there's something there in that live theater experience where, you know, your heart's beating differently. You sense the collaboration possibility with other people in that space, and that's where I'm really interested to keep pushing that limit of what's possible and keep experimenting.
But I think that one of the core elements in terms of, I don't want to say treatment, but is to create experiences or worlds that help a person to tell their own story. And that's at the core of like an exposure therapy approach with PTSD. Is you help a person by putting them in a context that is somewhat reminiscent or gradually becomes more reminiscent of the context in which they were traumatized. And people that can't talk about their trauma are the ones that are constantly reliving it internally or avoiding going to places because it's going to break the seal and they're going to wig out and have difficulty. So you help a person to tell their story when these experiences, and they find that being very, it's like a pressure valve, it just releases. Now, where I want to take this in this narrative direction is working with children that have had adverse childhood experiences. I mean, this is like an under the radar kind of a thing where, you can actually quantify the number of instances of abuse, neglect, and dysfunctional households, and draw a direct correlation between the number of those experiences kids have and problems later in life, both physical, with health conditions, diabetics, the whole spectrum, we go on with that, but also psychological or functional. Aside from depression, anxiety, what about school attainment, delinquency, substance abuse, all that, direct correlation. So one of the theories behind helping kids that have had traumatic experiences is to help them tell their story. And they're embarrassed or they don't have the words for it. Well, there's a woman by the name of Jessica Stone. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's built out this virtual sand tray. And a sand tray is a device used in play therapy with physical objects in this flat surface with sand. And you got to buy a ton of objects, and the kids tell their story by manipulating these objects. Well, she's, and they're symbolic and they represent things. And it's a way for a child to express what might be too hard for them to put in other words. Well, she built a virtual version of it, which is light years beyond what you can get with physical props, because the kids can build out with thousands. Her husband built tons and tons and tons of this content, these virtual objects, whether it's a dragon or it's a sky dome, it's a bright sunny day or a cloudy day, or critters walking around or idyllic stuff, whatever. And kids can build that in a VR environment. You do it on a touchpad and then put on a headset and walk around and tell their story about what's going on with a trained play therapist or whatever the clinical acumen that's needed for this. And to me, that is how you pull a story out of someone who doesn't know how to tell a story. That can be extremely therapeutic and begin putting a child on a path where you can start to question whether they're taking too much responsibility for what happened to them by another. That's one of the big problems. They feel like they caused it, or if they say anything, there's a loss of a resource or love. So, the whole narrative theme wends its way through a wide range of clinical application across the lifespan, helping people at the end of life tell their story, that are suffering from cancer. They don't got much left, helping them put their story in an existential framework that, helps them to go out in a good way, or reflect or share it with others. There's just so much stimulus here.
Those are the
in our app when people are at end of life and they upload their images into our experience, and even the way their family shares it. It's been some of the most powerful feedback loops from our users at end of life. We've had a few pass since then, but the gratitude we got back from them and their families by having just that feature. Because also, I know I lost my husband to cancer. You tend to start to think you are your illness, and we can use these virtual spaces to remind the person of who they are, what their journey really was beyond just the, current condition they're experienced. But yeah, Jeremy has had some really interesting community experiences around death and dying too.
Yeah, we've processed a fair amount of those events, and it's definitely, we have a very popular event called Death Q&A actually that we do every week, where people can just come and share the grief and share the loss that's upcoming or that's happened, or share a story about the person they lost, and talk about what they think happens when we die, and hear other people talk about that. We don't try to answer questions there. We just try to share our ideas and hear each other's thoughts, and it's extremely therapeutic. I also think, there's the real, extreme needs that Skip was talking about. I also think, I had a pretty decent childhood, but I still need an oil change in my brain, pretty regularly. And just getting in tilt brush by myself and I'm a terrible artist, like honestly, embarrassingly bad. And it doesn't matter because you're like painting with light sparkles and rainbow brushes. And like, even if you're a terrible artist, you feel like you're creating beauty around you, or whatever it is you feel like you need to express in that moment. And it just, I get into the flow state very quickly. I stop thinking about the issues, the anxieties. I'm just playing. And it's just a really good daily wellness checkup kind of thing, you know?
You know, try Jam Bass by Beams. It's the same thing, but with music.
Oh, that's on
and it turns every kind of guitar, musical instrument that you can select almost into a percussion instrument, so that no matter how you move your body, it all sounds good. And you know, you can be a horrible
like
musician.
Auto-tune.
Well, Skip, I love that you brought in the sand tray, because that's actually what my work in VR has been. I actually create these worlds and journeys based on sand tray formats, which is all kind of, it came out of the Jungian tradition. So what we can create in VR with that, you can't do, here's a use case. You can't do this in physical life, because I can't take an object and change its size in the sand tray that I'm creating something into. You can bury things, you can have things emerge out of other things in that program. And it's the only one that's been approved by the Sand Tray Association. So it's actually, I mean, it's being used for therapeutic purposes, but I don't see why we can't use it just for general purpose, creativity, spiritual, emotional wellness purposes. It's phenomenal because, again, we're working with that symbol energy and narrative in a very organic, natural, easy way.
I'm actually having dinner with Jessica tonight. She's coming into LA for a meeting, and one of the topics of our discussion is going to be, how do we expand the range of objects that she has to make it relevant for older or for adult trauma and you know, service members, different set of content that be available. It's some of the same stuff, of course. The tremendous opportunities in this area.
I met Jessica at AWE, so you have to say hi for me.
I will. She's a champ.
Her husband together, you know, creating this. And I do think it relates, whether it's different aspects of lifespan, being able to tell stories, encountering death and dying, some of these spiritual questions. It also allows us to, you know, some of what I've built is around virtual memory palaces and ways to capture stories and objects that then become something to give to somebody else and say, here, you know, this is my perspective, come see this, augment it with different elements of creation. And I find, again, that story allegory, those archetypes, they've been with us as humans since cave times. You know, how do we take that into VR and create something new that's about that human legacy of shared stories that can be liberating? This brings up a great point as we're discussing points of view and empathy and sharing different perspectives. Just quickly addressing, how does the ability to adopt multiple avatars in the metaverse, how is this beneficial? Skip, any of the research on less attachment to one fixed point of view? I know in the experiences I create, it's really positive when people can role play and can lose their attachment.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, I think you can't talk about this area without thinking about the work Jeremy Balance and others have done in building empathy, where they put you in the role of somebody who's become homeless and the transition from home to unhomed and all the issues, how that might happen, and the experience of that growing up Black in America. But people have also done this with one of the first empathy apps was Rita Addison doing something called brain deconstruction. Had an artistic, she was an artist and she had a brain injury, and then she rendered it in VR so you could have what her experience was. I mean, this is mid 90s. You know, going through the experience, what it's like for somebody at the verge of a migraine headache that was funded by Excedrin, obviously. But you know, all of these are opportunities you never had any other way of doing it. You know, I mean, you could always talk about it. You could watch people in a movie and live through their life. But when you live it yourself, when you're embodied in it, there's a different part of the brain that's going on. And so I think there's a lot of value in that. And maybe there's a lot of value in that with kids, or like you mentioned about some of the political issues. You have Israelis and Palestinians in a shared kind of a world, and then flip-flopping and working together, or, you know, living with their, anyway, you get my point. I'll shut up so we can save some space for everybody else.
Yeah, I have a story along these lines I like to tell. When early on I was setting up VR, and I was using Rec Room, just playing around in there. And I have a younger daughter who, she was about 8 at the time, maybe 7. And she was allowed to stay in like our little clubhouse room, like that's just yours. She wasn't allowed to go out into the Rec Room social environment, but she would play in there and love it. And one time I jumped in after she had been in there and I didn't realize it. And I left the clubhouse room into the main space. And I was suddenly treated just extremely different than I ever had been. People were like physically putting their hands on me and saying weird things to me. And I walked by a mirror and I saw I was in my daughter's female bodied avatar. Now, I obviously intellectually knew that women had this experience. But having it myself was really powerful. It really was. And so I think there's like two sides to this coin where, you know, you can do really powerful work around that, and digital blackface is a terrible idea. And, you know, people who just think like, I'm going to go be a woman, or I'm going to go be someone of a different skin color, like not really treat it with respect or, you know, meaning, it could get really ugly really quick too. So I think, you know, when we tackle these things, we got to be really careful and conscious of how we're doing them.
Thoughtful.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
think of it in a whole, the angle that I come in at this is thinking about, wow, the expansion of sense of self and identity to multiple selves. Because if we're not so fixated on one story of ourselves, because we're great, big, vast, unlimited, multidimensional beings. And, you know, there's so many versions of ourselves, just like from when you were 4 years old to now, how many different versions of yourself? You're not the same person. So I think this kind of expanding the capacity to hold a more multidimensional sense of yourself and multiple identities is, again, this whole like the evolution of consciousness. I mean, to me, that's where I get really turned on, and about, okay, how can we help people expand their sense of self and loosen that rigid fixity of having to defend some idea of self?
Yes, yes. Walt Whitman said we contain multitudes. That's one of those quotes I carry with me. And John O'Donohue, if anyone knows him as a writer and poet, he was also a theologian and Irish, and basically said that if you stifle those impulses to have many ways to express yourself, then you will feel a loss of freedom, and you will feel that. And I think, you know, part of what we're attending to with well-being is giving people a chance to see through somebody else's eyes. Again, as Jeremy said, you need to do it mindfully. It's about the integrity of the experience and sometimes the lead in. That's why Courtney Cogburn, you know, when she created some of these empathy experiences for the virtual human interaction lab, she does not just open them up publicly, because part of this is about the onboarding and the story that you want to tell about the ways that they're integrated. So
I'd like
yeah,
to
so
share an
interesting.
experience we had when we were building Trip that was really interesting to me, and I started to understand just even the power of the container of VR. And there is the psychological safety that you can create in an immersive world can allow you to let go of all these concepts that you have around yourself. And you know, like I'm a woman who's worked in the games industry for a long time, so I certainly have a very specific persona to survive and succeed in that environment, that sometimes, like in my meditation practice, I get freedom from it. And when we were testing Trip prototype initially, I noticed this weird thing consistently happening. When men would come out of it, they would have tears in their eyes. And it was like this emotional reaction to our product. And I realized that what we had created a container where they could drop sort of the man face, or this, I'm a man, right? Which is nothing wrong with that, but getting the relief from it. And then with the women, because we're all we're just hardwired to be on guard. I remember one of my friends going, "Well, I feel a little like frisky right now after your experience," and I noticed that a few more times, and I went, "Oh my God, what is happening here?" But it was really around that psychological safety to let go of your identity. And so, maybe it will lean into products that help support people in both areas. I mean, it could be a huge business to have sort of a female sort of mood stimulator that could be very popular. Trips like that. It's fun to experiment with these things because, the physical world really does impose a lot on our identity. And VR can be an opportunity for us to drop that too.
I was curious if that embodied your vision of the ideal future of flourishing in the metaverse, because we're going to do a quick round of what we think is the ideal future of flourishing, because what you just said spoke to freedom and certainly levels of humor as well.
Yeah, well, for me, our vision for Trip in the future will be, we really want to create the destination for mindful, transformative experiences in the metaverse, and create toolkits that will attract the creators who want to participate and build that with us, as well as how to engage community and groups collectively in that. And we've been very consistent about also working with people like Skip and Walter Greenleaf, Walter Rizzo. They just
That's
had
my other
they
buddy.
just that's your other avatar. Because there is a foundation of responsibility that we also need to approach these new environments with, and the research that they've done can really influence a lot of our thinking in a healthy way, promote healthy ways to look at privacy, experiences that could be used for good or not. And so we want to create that safe zone. That's my commitment to, the vision of the future of a flourishing metaverse.
I'll just be real quick and say, I think all the things we've talked about for individuals to have these new experiences and share experiences with us, great. But I look at it on a larger scale. When you look at the statistics, like the World Health Organization saying there's about 600 million people walking the planet right now with mental health conditions that are not being addressed. Fully 2/3 will never see the inside of a therapy office. So we got to break down barriers to care, and we've got to make care in a variety of formats more available. And this may be one of those vehicles to help do that. And if we improve the mental health of the whole planet, maybe it'd be a flourishing real world that we'll have here.
Absolutely. Mikhaila, short ideal.
Yeah,
flourishing?
mine would be like this vision I have for being able to scale like spiritual activation. As soon as we get the hardware and scaled, then we can have hundreds of millions of people having experiences together that we could never have done before. So that is what totally turns me on, is just creating these experiences that organically, naturally stimulate and activate your own capacity to connect in that way.
Jeremy?
Distributed, not owned by any one person or group. A lot of freedom. I think that I really hope the part that I can contribute to a flourishing metaverse is sanctuary all over it, so that wherever you are, you'll be able to find a Trip community that's safe and mindful and ready to welcome you. So yeah, I look forward to that part of it at least.
Yeah, and for me, that word freedom speaks to me, and also that wellness is baked into the equation, not as an end product or as an add-on, but as a real feature that people defend identify and use as a collective so that we meet needs for each other socially, collectively, and that we each have our individual opportunities to make the metaverse something that's meaningful to us. So, it becomes something that leads into social change and has real output in the decisions we make, whether they're environmental, social. This affects the fabric of our life, and ideally the metaverse should be empowering for all of us and not reductive. So with that said, this conversation has been so dynamic, so multifaceted, and as predicted, we went into all of these different facets that have to do with well-being, flourishing, avatars, identity, therapies. To me, it just touches the edge of where we're going, and each of you is a futurist, a leader, and an embodied empowerer of social organizations worldwide. So just, already that I would spend time with you any day of the week. And today is a time to gather together. And I feel that energy from each of you. So thank you for speaking from your core and sharing some of your stories, your use cases, your truths, and reaching so many others. We'll have all of our details as part of this. So if anyone listening wants to reach out and expand the conversation beyond this, you can do so individually or together. So thank you, team. And
thank you, everyone.
Wishing everybody a great day.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.